In this video, I would like to discuss two very important and you may even think polarized ideas when it comes to, disordered eating or harmful eating habits. And that is the idea of intuitive eating versus, or I don't like that word versus, so I say and sugar addiction recovery. I am giving this video because I was inspired by Molly Carmel's podcast where she interviewed Elise Resch, who wrote the book of intuitive eating. And she makes the claim that there is no such thing as food addiction. I am not going to make the claim that there is no such thing as intuitive eating. I believe that there are both. There is such a thing as intuitive eating, and there is such a thing as sugar addiction recovery. They don't necessarily always go together, but they do in some ways. And here are my thoughts about it. So first, let's define what intuitive eating is. Intuitive eating is basically the idea that people should reconnect to their natural human tendency, right? Or human reactions to foods that it says, I've had enough. Now is the time to stop. And when people who are having problems with their eating habits can reconnect to that intuition, to that inner voice that says, okay, now it's enough. That's an amazing thing. And I think that way people who can do that when it comes to all foods, and this is what the intuitive eating movement says, that there is no food that somebody cannot develop this natural, reconnect to this natural intuition of saying, now I'm full, or now it's enough, and be done. I do, and here is where maybe we part ways, the philosophy of intuitive eating and the philosophy of sugar addiction recovery. Because here's the thing, okay? What do many people who say there is no such thing as sugar addiction? They say everybody's got to eat. Well, if you want to know the truth, I take drugs. When I have a headache, I use paracetamol or ibuprofen. When I have a very bad infection, I will take antibiotics if my physician will recommend it. So I take drugs, but I don't take drugs, and there are some drugs that I take. For example, I had a colonoscopy and I was sedated before. And so I took drugs that change the way I feel, but I'm not addicted to them. I will sometimes take some, if I've had in my life tramadol or Percocet or I don't know what. So yeah, sometimes I take drugs, but I'm not addicted to drugs. Some people drink, everybody drinks, even alcoholics drink. Maybe they don't drink alcohol. Maybe they don't drink beverages that change the way they feel, but they drink water, they drink coffee, they drink soda. God forbid, they might even drink Coke or Sprite. And then there are people and food, yes, we all need to eat food, but we don't necessarily need to eat the foods that work in the brain in the same place as other substances that can be abused because they change the way we feel, like drugs and illicit drugs, right? And alcohol, that what happens is that some people who have that tendency to become addicted to that effect of how it changes the way they feel. And then the addiction hijacks the brain. And then even they can't stop using, they can't control their use. They can't say, oh, I've had a few puffs of marijuana, that's enough, right? And then what happens is that when addiction occurs and there's this dependence that develops, like it's not I want, it's not even I need, it's I can't do without, then there's a lack of control, even though they know that they are harming themselves. Well, that happens also with certain foods that have been shown also to be addictive, right? Sugary, starchy, hyper-processed foods that are hyper-stimulate those same areas in the brain that drugs and alcohol do. So yes, there is evidence-based medicine for intuitive eating, and it works for some people. And there is enough science and data out there to understand there is such a thing as getting addicted to sugar, especially to these sugary, starchy, hyper processed foods, which are much, much more stimulating than nature, than any food that you will find in nature, right? And we talk about this a lot in our course. So I would like to talk about that. Now, here's the thing. When, intuitive eating, the movement really um, is against taking out any foods, yet learning to eat all foods in moderation. And my take is if that works for you, if you go to an intuitive eating group or some kind of, you read a book, at least Resh's book, whatever it is, you did the things and it worked for you, fantastic. I'm happy for you. Whatever works for healthy eating, I think is a good thing and a good idea. There is no one treatment model, food philosophy, food plan, even philosophy of treatment towards disordered eating or any kind of harmful eating that works for everyone. But what I say is that if you tried it and you tried it again and you tried it again and it's not working for you, you're still struggling with overweight, with metabolic disease, with the way that your eating is affecting negatively your quality of life in a very significant way, then maybe it's trying to try something different. Because what happens is when people, especially people who are affected by the addictive qualities of these hyper processed, hyper delicious, hyper stimulating foods, and they abstain from them, then what happens is that the craving goes down and people can go back to this intuitive eating with real food, which means many, many times people who have done my program, GPS to Sugar Free, they'll abstain from sugar and flour and eat, set meals, and what happens is they say, all of a sudden they'll say, that I used to finish like huge amounts of food during my meal. And now I can't even finish one plate because many times what happens is that these hyper processed, sugary, starchy foods, right? They what get out, make the satiety hunger system out of whack. It just completely it goes, and then people are constantly hungry. They have this gnawing hunger for food, for starchy foods, but for food in general. And I know I remember it on myself. I never felt full when I was at the height of my sugar addiction. I never felt full and I never felt hungry. I just felt like I have to put something in my mouth. I have to eat something all the time, 24/7. I mean, I wasn't at the point where I was waking up in the middle of the night to eat, but I've had clients who are like that. And what happens is I see this on my clients again and again, when people abstain completely from these foods, what happens is that, yes, that there's a certain intuitive like fullness that I've had enough and I can't eat anymore that comes, and you naturally stop eating at moderate amounts of food. But this happens when you're eating real food, right? Proteins, vegetables, fruits, healthy carbs, healthy whole grain carbs, legumes, things like that. When you're eating real food, then for many, many people, even if they are severely addicted to sugar and all these like, what I call crappy carbs, right? Even if they're severely, many, many times they'll be able to eat in moderation if they're abstaining from the foods that they are addicted to. Having said that, I do know that there is a certain percentage of people who it doesn't go back to that society, that satiety, right? That feeling full and I've had enough, and they can naturally stop eating. And these are people who might need to weigh and measure their meals, which is also cool. So my message is there is such a thing as intuitive eating. For some people, it can work with all foods. For some people, intuitive eating as a way to correct they're severely disordered eating, like that they're harmful eating, this uncontrolled um, eating that it some for some people that just doesn't work, and then they need a model of abstaining. And for many people who are really truly addicted to sugar, intuitive eating, when it comes to the sugary, starchy, hyperprocessed foods, like those foods that they're addicted to, it won't work for them. In the same way that, you know, smoking in moderation won't work many times for a heavy smoker. It's like one puff and they're off. And it'll happen to people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol and to many things like that. So, yes, people need to eat food. No, people do not need to eat all the foods that are being sold today. And especially when today, as opposed to, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago, so much of our food is more processed and has more of these sugars and addictive qualities to them. So eat real. If if you've tried this intuitive eating model and it's not working for you, my message to you is that yes, the model of abstaining from addictive foods works for many people. There is such a thing as sugar addiction, food addiction, call it whatever you want, but there is such a thing. And for many of these people, the model of abstaining in the same way as other addiction treatment models works. Now, I want to give an extra definition, which is talking about harm reduction in addiction treatment. Okay, and I include in this foods. Unfortunately, um, in drug addiction treatment, for example, the pharmaceutical company has kind of adopted the term harm reduction as like medical, like medicine treatment for drug addiction. But actually, the term harm reduction means that there are some people that complete abstinence is just not a possible goal for whatever reason. And sometimes it's just because that, but maybe using less and having less harm can be a goal, right? For example, if God forbid, a woman is, injecting heroin and has, selling her body in order to finance her habit, and maybe they can get her to start using, she doesn't stop using drugs completely, but is using less harmful drugs that maybe, they won't find her overdosed in a bathroom, one day soon, but she is using drugs, but less harmful drugs, then wow, she's come a huge way. And especially if she can start functioning properly in society, even though maybe she is not completely abstaining from drugs, but she's managed to do that, well, that's success in treatment. And I say the same thing with foods, especially, and as opposed to illicit drugs or alcohol, which is very severely, or even today, thank God, like nicotine, which are severely regulated. So it's not around and not so available and so cheap like it was once. So today, though, the addictive foods, right? Not only are they cheap and available, it's like if you don't eat them, something's wrong with you. We've been like brainwashed to think that we can't be happy without sugar. Now, there are some people who their goal is to abstain, but right now they're at the point where they're at harm reduction. They haven't managed to completely abstain, but they are eating much, much less than they were before. Well, that's a huge thing. That's wonderful. And that doesn't mean that they can't abstain. Maybe it means that they're on their way, that their sugar-free journey just hasn't gotten there yet. And it's a worthy goal. Many times it's attainable. Sometimes it's not attainable at a certain point of time. Or sometimes there are maybe some people who, yeah, they break, they slip, what have you. But if they're consuming, I always tell this, some of my clients slip. I slip sometimes. I don't slip anymore on sugar and flour, but I did in the beginning, in the first years. But I never said to myself, because I had a slip, which is, I never went back to that diet mentality saying, like, oh, if I slip, I guess I can't abstain from sugar and flour. No, I said, okay, I had a slip, or I even like had a relapse, but that doesn't mean I'm just gonna, I'm gonna recommit and do better and just see what I can learn from this and what I need to do differently from the next time we talk about this on the video of our slips in this course. So here you have, just in summary, you have three very important terms when it comes to sugar detox. And especially if you're looking at, your future beyond this doable 30-day sugar detox course. And which is about intuitive eating, which is a very important term. It is something that is possible for some people with all foods, but not everyone. And for many people who feel that they are truly addicted to sugar or to these sugary, starchy, hyper-processed foods, for many people, this intuitive eating when it comes to these addictive foods is not a solution for them. It just doesn't work. And for it, moderation, one square of chocolate, it doesn't work. It just causes this cascade and this loss of control. And for these people, abstaining, and also, of course, people who have a problem with addiction to any substance, just abstaining from the addictive substance won't be enough for long-term recovery. There does have to be a process of healing that inner talk, of healing the relationship with food, of changing that diet mentality into a self-love, self-acceptance, and healing dialogue. And that takes work. That is so it's not enough just the abstaining, but that is an important first step so that the brain can heal, so that the body can heal, so that there's not this constant craving of more and more and more. And this is what abstaining from addictive foods does for many, many people. And as I said, and sometimes when the goal is abstaining, there are certain times, situations, people where harm reduction, doing less than I did before. If my clients have a slip, sometimes I'll say to them, well, okay, over Passover holiday, you had a slip. But how was your Passover holiday, in general compared to last year? And they're like, oh, no comparison. Well, that's a huge deal. That's an even huger deal, maybe, than the slip that happened. So we have to remember that abstaining doesn't mean perfection, right? And along with abstaining, or along with not using those substances that using them to change the way I feel, but it really doesn't work anymore. And all I'm doing is really slowly killing myself with food, for example, if that does, is of course alongside with to stop using the addictive substance, there has to be also a process of changing the inner dialogue, the talk, and the relationship with food. I hope that this has given you some real food for thought. And I'll see you in the next